So I will be continuing today in our sermon series where we are working our way through the Gospel of John. As many of us know, Martin Luther was the German monk who affixed 95 theological statements to the door of Wittenberg Cathedral, and so inadvertently struck the spark that ignited the Protestant Reformation that subsequently swept like a wildfire across Europe in the 16th century. Not long after affixing these 95 theses to the door, Luther found himself not only hunted by supporters of the Catholic Church as a heretic, but the head of a rapidly growing German nationalist movement and the founder of a new branch of Christianity. As historian John Dillenberger puts it, over the course of his life, Luther was involved in preaching, teaching, writing, and dealing with innumerable problems and crises of both church and state. His problems multiplied. There were protracted periods of illness during which his literary activity was prodigious. Luther threw his energies not only into negating the pretensions and errors of the Roman Catholic Church, but also into the positive task of the reformation of the life and thought of the church. From the preaching of the word for the edification and education of the masses, through the reformation of the liturgy and the organization of new patterns of church life, there would have been problems enough even in the normal course of things. And yet, despite having myriad responsibilities, worries, and challenges, Luther famously declared, "I have so much to do that I shall spend the first 3 hours of my day in prayer." What could Luther possibly be talking about? I mean, it makes no sense. Well, the answer is to be found in two passages, one from the Gospel of John and the other from the Gospel of Luke. We'll begin in Luke, chapter 10, beginning with verse 38. As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work for myself? Tell her to help me." Now, at this point, if we're honest, we're apt to be fairly critical of Martha, aren't we? I mean, Jesus was in her very house, and yet, rather than give him her attention, she's bustling around in the kitchen. I mean, surely she doesn't really appreciate who it is she's entertaining in her home, because if she did, right, she would have stopped what she was doing and given him her undivided attention. But actually, she was doing exactly what she should have been doing. As biblical scholar R.H. Stein points out, throughout the Mediterranean world, hospitality to strangers was recognized as a sacred duty. The host would provide for his or her guest, housing, protection, and food. If he arrived in time for the evening meal. No expense or labor was too great for the traveler, who was treated as master of the house. The host frequently prepared for her guest a luxurious banquet. And so Martha was only doing what any devout Jewess would have done to show respect and love for a visiting rabbi. Because remember, Jesus and his disciples, right, had been walking along roads in the hot sun, possibly for much of the day. They would have been tired and hungry. So it's possible that they'd had little to eat. And it was her responsibility to prepare food for them. And remember, they didn't have refrigerators, right, or prepackaged food back then. So she couldn't just saunter into the kitchen and pull out a TV dinner, right, and pop it in the microwave. And there were quite a few mouths to feed. 13 grown men, right? Many of them blue-collar workers, big strapping fellows, remember, who'd been walking all day in the hot sun. And so if Jesus and his disciples were going to eat anything that night, it was going to take planning and a lot of preparation on Martha's part. So she didn't have any time to spare. And remember, if she didn't do it, she would have been showing her disrespect for Jesus, his disciples, and even God, since God required that as a good hostess, she provide for the needs of her guests. In addition to all this, as New Testament scholar Craig Keener points out, disciples traditionally sat at the feet of their teachers. Serious disciples, right, were preparing to be teachers themselves, a role not permitted to women. So one can fully understand Martha's annoyance at her sister Mary. Not only is Mary not lifting a finger to help her, by sitting at Jesus' feet in the attitude of a disciple, Mary was doing something that would have shocked people's sense of propriety. So in light of all this, it was completely understandable that Martha would complain to Jesus. Instead of commending her, however, Jesus says something that would have taken her and everyone else present completely by surprise. "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed, really only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her." The only thing truly needed, the only thing truly necessary, was for Martha to be in Jesus' presence, at his feet, focusing her attention on him, listening to hear what he was saying. Right? And the implication being that if Martha did this, she wouldn't be worried or upset. Now, it's important to reemphasize that it wasn't that Martha's work was unimportant, all the work she had to do. It was important. Jesus' point, however, was that time spent with him was more important than anything else, even the most important cultural and familial obligations and duties. Let me repeat this. Jesus' point was that time spent with him was more important than anything else, even the most important cultural and familial obligations and duties. But why? Why was spending time with Jesus more important than anything else, even commitment to family, job, or any other responsibilities? Well, Jesus tells us in John chapter 15. He declares, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes so that it will be even more fruitful. You are already clean because of the word I have spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you are like a branch that is thrown away and withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my word remains in you, ask whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. So in this passage, Jesus makes the point, right, that the sign that someone is his disciple is that they remain in him, meaning they maintain a consistent, daily, disciplined relationship with him, characterized by sitting in his presence, listening to him, and learning from him, the very thing that Mary was doing. And as a result, they make a difference in their world. They have an eternal impact on the people around them. They see God's power at work in their life. They bear fruit. So what does this mean for us today? Well, it means that it's absolutely essential that we prioritize time with Jesus. There will always be things that we legitimately need to attend to, like Martha. Things that are important, family obligations, work, children. But if we wait until that's not the case, we will never, or very seldom, spend time with Jesus. And consequently, our lives won't have the kind of impact that we all want them to have. A question for you. Do you prioritize time with Jesus every day? Or do you regularly excuse not spending time with him because you have too many other things that have to be done? Spend time with Jesus. Do you habitually struggle with anxiety or worry? Spend time with Jesus. As you look at your life, do you see spiritual fruit? Meaning, do you see God at work? Is Jesus working through you to share the gospel? Is he speaking through you to minister comfort and encouragement to others? Are you making a positive difference in other people's lives? Are you worshiping and serving God through your vocation, your job? Are you bearing fruit? If you look at your life and you realize you're not bearing fruit, spend time with Jesus. As a pastor, I often, over the years, have spent time with people engaged in counseling, right? Pastoral counseling. People have come over the years with a variety of challenges and difficulties and fears or concerns, anxieties. Folks, I only ever have one answer to that. Spend time with Jesus. Everything flows from our relationship with Jesus. Right? We minister out of the overflow of our time spent in his presence. That's where we go to get filled up. That's where we go to get the strength to do the things that we know we should do. That's where we go to have our hearts changed so that we even want to do the things we know we should do. It's all from abiding in the vine. Spend time with Jesus. He is very life itself. So why did Luther spend 3 hours a day in prayer? Even though he was faced with almost overwhelming responsibilities and a workload that would crush most of us, because he knew that the absolute essential thing, in fact, the only truly needful thing, was to spend time with Jesus. Because his very fruitfulness, his success as a disciple, depended on it. It's a very simple message today, folks. Right? And I'm not even telling you anything practical about how to do it, because you know how to do it. I'd like to close the sermon by quoting someone who, like Luther, was a very busy man. John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church, famously over the course of his life traveled 250,000 miles on horseback, averaging 20 miles a day for 40 years. He preached 4,000 sermons, produced 400 books, and learned 10 languages. All while leading a spiritual revival that birthed the Methodist Church. This is what he said about the importance of spending time every day with Jesus in prayer and Bible study. Oh, fix some part of every day for private spiritual exercises. You may acquire the taste which you have not. What is tedious at first will afterwards be pleasant. Whether you like it or not, read and pray daily. It is for your very life. There is no other way. Else you will be a trifler all your days. Take up your cross and be a Christian. You all pray with me.